At last the spheres arise to the din of dark concert, as here beneath the gibbous eye of the watching moon waits lonely earth. Probably? That certainly seems like the kind of thing that should be going on. I mean, we've been promising this series for almost 2 years now. You'd think the horrors that lurk in the darkness beyond the cosmos would have something to say about the fact that we're finally making videos about them. Then again, I suppose hopeless insignificance is half the fun of cosmic horror, isn't it? So, astral omens or no, I think it's time we face the void together. Let's talk about H.P. Lovecraft. The man has an interesting legacy. Although he was born and died in relative obscurity, hardly a penny to his name, the majority of his creations relegated to the pages of lurid pulp mags, the work of Howard Phillips Lovecraft has since evolved. Over the last few decades, his fiction has slowly turned into something malignant, invading pop culture through every available artery, from the direct canal of homage to the branching venules of aesthetic mimicry. If you look, you can find traces of it in film, television, games of both the video and paper variety, even heavy metal music. A lot of well-loved authors like Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett, and Stephen King have paid credit to Lovecraft's role in their work. In fewer words, he's become one of the great icons of Western horror. Nevertheless, Lovecraft's fame springs not from the man himself, but from the mythos he built. Deities like Tentacle Mod Cthulhu and ineffable Yog-Sothoth, locales like Arkham and Miskatonic University, fictional sources of profane wisdom like the Necronomicon, all belong to the same cabinet of familiar, interweaving props that combined his otherwise disparate works into a single mythological performance on a single cosmic stage. That's a very literary, verbose way to put things, but it's important. There's strange arcana to uncover in the classification of Lovecraft's mythos, stranger than any number of tentacle monsters or non-Euclidean angles. The key to understanding Lovecraft's mythos is to understand that they're actual myth, not just the product of clever world-building. For a single author, that's very unique. In the context of fiction, mythos is usually just an affectation for titles from a set of tales that share connecting lore. Think of Tolkien's Silmarillion or George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Both are full of unrelated stories that contribute to a larger fiction, but that doesn't quite qualify them as actual myth. They're novel, the brainchildren of clever authors. They may contain gods and supernatural feats, but these are only the common elements of myth. Ultimately, they're missing one key component, something present in all major world mythologies: mimetic circulation. Big scholarly words. What we're really talking about is the game of telephone that cultures play with their folktales. A story is told and altered and told and altered until its iconography is so tempered by the exchange that it reflects something about its tellers. The gods and the heroes and the strange origin stories are only the props that they use in the habitual projection of their ideals, feelings, fears, their cumulative psyche onto a larger, less ephemeral platform, that cosmic stage I mentioned earlier. And somehow, shut away in the dim solitude of his study, Lovecraft managed to do the same. A large part of it comes from his specific artifice, or rather, the lack of it. Unlike the authors of most fictional mythos, Lovecraft didn't really bother to contrive what he was creating. It just happened. He had a habit of making passing references to items, figures, and locales of limited intrigue, only to appropriate them for bigger roles in later stories, incidentally tying them together. Arkham was just a place name when it first appeared in his story Herbert West Reanimator, but a year later it featured again in The Festival, earning its role as a hub for the supernatural in his works. Dagon is a key deity in one of Lovecraft's most famous stories, The Shadow over Innsmouth, but it began as a vague, disconnected reference in the story Dagon 14 years earlier. The other part of this comes from his peers. Lovecraft was a decidedly strange individual with an incredibly traumatic early life, and as a result did most of his socializing through letters. Unsurprisingly, the majority of his correspondents were other amateur writers who worked in similar spheres. It was through his dialogue with them that he was able to broaden the scope of his mythos beyond the usual self-appropriation. He encouraged them to borrow freely from him, watching and enjoying the ways they built upon his mythos. Clark Ashton Smith introduced the toad-like god creature Tsathoggua, who received multiple cameos in Lovecraft's works, including The Whisper in Darkness, The Horror in the Museum, and At the Mountains of Madness. In the unpublished introduction to his story The Space Eaters, Frank Belknap Long famously quoted an apocryphal version of Lovecraft's Necronomicon, supposedly translated by the real-world scholar John Dee. Lovecraft, of course, snatched this up and adapted it for his lore, referring to the John Dee translation of the book in letters about the Necronomicon's history. In this way, Lovecraft was able to develop a cabinet of props to use in the performance of his own psyche. He did with his mythos what cultures do with their mythological iconography, a kind of internal mimetic circulation, projecting his thoughts and fears and feelings onto that cosmic stage. Actual myth created by one person. See his philosophy of cosmic insignificance in the minor role of mankind against a backdrop of indifferent alien creatures and oblivious deities. See his racism and fear of the outside, anything beyond the scope of his limited world in New England, manifest as invasive and malevolent entities like the shape-shifting Nyarlathotep and the crossbreeding Deep Ones of Innsmouth. If you look, you'll find these projections everywhere in his work, sometimes even at the expense of consistency. He didn't spare time for the articulation of a specific canon. It was what the elements of his mythos represented that drove him to keep using them. What we officially call the Cthulhu mythos, he flippantly referred to in his letters as yog-sothothery and Cthulhuism. This is what we love most about Lovecraft's mythos. Just as romantics invoke Apollo and Aphrodite, Artemis and Athena, so too do we invoke Azathoth and yog-sothoth, Nyarlathotep and Cthulhu. Not just because we like tentacle monsters or people going mad, or because we enjoy Lovecraft's writing so much that we really just want to copy him, but because their meaning resonates with us. We want to use them as the prompts in our own psychological performance. And that's exactly what we plan to do for this month's short story. It should be an interesting experiment to apply Lovecraft's method to my own psyche. I'm still not sure what part of me that will reflect, and I'm still not sure whether I find that troubling, especially in light of recent circumstances. If you frequent the Discord server, you may already have an inkling as to what I'm talking about. I've been rather absent lately. Part of this is due to my role in the Foundry, the extensive research I do before each of these series. The other part, oh, this will make a lot more sense if you've listened to Human Almost, the biographical story I created with the help of our writer. But the short of it is that my taloids have stopped bringing me book pages from inside the Foundry's great press. Instead, I've been receiving letters. I don't yet know who they're from, but the correspondence has been fascinating to say the least, if very time-consuming. Between this and those things that interrupted our shooting of the Junji Ito episode, it's very clear that something's going on here. Now the trick is finding out what that something is. If you'd like to help us, you can support the Tale Foundry team on Patreon. With only 2 trustworthy humans at our disposal, we don't exactly have the means of clearing the rubble and delving deeper into this facility, whatever it is. But the support of each of our patrons brings us that much closer. You can also support the show for $0 by starting a free 1-month trial with Audible.com. Sign up using the link in the description, and you'll get access to 2 free audiobooks of your choice from Audible's catalog of over 100,000 titles. Lately, the Tale Foundry team has been listening to the Complete H.P. Lovecraft Omnibus Volume 2, compiled and read by Finn J.D. John. If you haven't yet had a chance to catch up on your Lovecraft, this is a great opportunity to do it while you drive or work or create whatever art it is that you create. At any rate, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and keep making stuff up. We'll see you next time. Bye!